Hey everyone, welcome to TechStrong Gang. You know, this is going to be our first episode where we truly have a gang, because not only are we going to have our normal TechStrong team members here, and for those who don't know, to my far left, it's Mike Vizard. The lady in the middle is Bonnie Schneider. Joining us from Colorado is Mitchell Ashley, and of course I'm Alan Schimmel of TechStrong. But later on in our show today, we're going to have the one and only John Willis, acclaimed author, DevOps, cloud expert, and we're going to be talking a little bit about AI, which is kind of his new expertise as well. So we're excited to have John as our first TechStrong Gang member to join us here on the broadcast, and grateful to have him available to us. Before we get to John, though, we have a couple of other topics we were going to bring up today. We're going to be talking about some recent news out of Cisco and around layoffs. And layoffs, of course, are not solely just Cisco in the tech industry today, unfortunately. We're also going to be talking about some AI and some of the recent going on here at TechStrong. In addition to which, we're going to cover an article that John recently penned on I believe he's on Digital CXO or DevOps.com, Mike?
It was on, well, he has two actually, one on Digital CXO and the other one is on TechStrong.ai, and one covers a new mathematical approach and the other one is about, well, vector databases. So.
Yep. And then as we've been doing at the conclusion of TechStrong Gang, we are going to be running on TechStrong TV our full lineup of shows and interviews and other content that we hope you'll find interesting. Again, if you have any suggestions or comments for us on this, write to TechStrongGang at TechStrongGroup.com, and we'd love to hear from you. All right, so folks, welcome back. Thanks for being here. I wanted to bring up some news I actually caught this morning as I was getting dressed listening to news on Alexa, and that is that the story is Cisco might be laying off up to 5% more people. And this comes on the heels of them laying off about 4,000 people last quarter. 5%, by the way, I think Cisco has 80-something thousand employees, so 5% is probably another 4,000, which would bring the total number here between 8,000 and 9,000. Look, layoffs are not news in tech today. Mm-hmm. You know, I was on a recent, Mitchell and I were on a recent trip to Boston, and every company we met with had layoffs. They said it was layoff season. I hope that there's an off season for layoffs, that means. Yeah. But what I found interesting, though, is in reporting numbers and results, their business didn't necessarily shrink, right? Security grew, I think it was 4%. Networking grew 7 to 10%, something like that, a healthy number. And the big number came out of their observability group, which grew something like 21%. And granted, that's probably by far the smallest group of the three I mentioned, but still 21% growth is a healthy number. And I will add that that's not counting Splunk, right? Mm-hmm. So observability is primarily around the AppD business unit that they had acquired, of course, when they acquired AppD. Now, with Splunk coming in, we've heard that Splunk's going to be on the security side of the house ledger with Cisco. I don't know if that's just lip service, because Splunk's, a big player in the observability space.
This is true.
Mitch, Michael, what do you guys think?
I think,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike, jump in.
I think a lot of the times, this is a Wall Street driven conversation, and the vendors will say things to Wall Street that they think will drive shares, so they throw around the word security. I think the Splunk code is going to wind up in both the security side and in the observability side, because the techies that run Cisco are not stupid. They're not going to go, oh, well, we can only use that in security. Mm-hmm. So I think that will flow along, and in general, I don't know, Mitch, what do you think?
I think it's all about the deal, all about the acquisition and positioning it with the market. And so there isn't any kind of product overlap with other, like you mentioned, Alan, the other observability technology observability is being used in everything today, right? It's operations, it's security, it's data, it's, people are all looking at how to get access to this information. So, no big predictions, but I got to imagine they'll take Splunk and have an offering in different parts of the market, not just security. So they're not going to turn away all their non-security business, that's for sure.
Right. It's much more than the code. Splunk has a lot of observability customers.
Exactly.
And it's about converting them. And maybe you'll see a combined AppD Splunk kind of observability solution. And it'll be even, make it a better solution.
Do you think that might help point to future growth and getting off of layoff season?
I don't know.
I think to your point, though, the layoffs are driven much more by Wall Street than anything else. They're getting beat up for becoming more profitable. It's not just Cisco, but all these companies. And I think the whole process is somewhat counterproductive because they're clearly taking a blunt instrument to the process and they're just basically saying, we're going to cut these people without thinking through, well, how disruptive is all those cuts going to be to the customer? The customer is going to buy less because they're going to be like, well, who's my person? Who do I deal with? And then that will have a negative impact on revenues and margins. So I don't want to say this is stupid, but it's pretty close to it.
Well, I think also the fact is that these cuts have an inordinate heavier toll on sales and marketing than they do on engineering. Look, I think the perception out there is that tech was on a fat, drunken buying spree for the last 4 or 5 years, hiring people way beyond their needs. And that this is just kind of, trimming fat and returning to reality. And then there's this other perception, and I think Zuckerberg at Meta reinforced it, which is, hey, we could get 25% higher profits while having 25% less people. And you say that to one of the, Wall Street guys, they're like, all of a sudden they go all Gordon Gekko on you.
Right, that's the new benchmark.
Greed is good. And
greed is good.
Greed's what made America great. And so that is the new benchmark.
Alan, it kind of goes back to what we were saying. You mentioned our trip to Boston and layoff season. I think there's some cover in doing it right now, too. You do your layoffs while everybody else from Microsoft to Meta to whoever. I think there's 144 tech companies that have done. I read an article on CNBC. So now's the season to do it. If you're going to do it, you're not going to get as much attention. The story will be gone by noon today, right? It'll be something else.
I think, too, though, a lot of these companies, to your earlier point, they roll up acquisitions, right? And I keep adding new companies into the play, and I don't really operationalize that very efficiently. So you do get a lot of overhead over time. And I think, so some of these companies like Cisco, there's probably some fluff in there because there's so many additional people who are selling 1 or 2 products when the buyers are looking for somebody who's going to sell them, the entire stack.
Well, that's a whole look. I've done a roll-up back in the .com days. There's a lot of that, right? The consolidation of multiple sales teams. Not even talking about the consolidation of multiple platforms and technology tools. But quite frankly, until interest rates start moving, because certainly the fact that the stock market is at all-time highs is not slowing down the momentum of layoffs. So it's going to take something else. But this is the cycles. It'll go. We've bottomed out. I think we're on our way up. But an interesting thing I heard from a friend of mine yesterday. Used to write for us at TechStrong. He's been a marketing person in tech 30 years. He's been out of work 7 months, not able to find a position. And he's a good writer. He has great Microsoft connections and everything. And he's ready to go work at Home Depot or something, right? Because he just can't find a job. And that's, we could talk out here all that we want and think we know what Wall Street wants and everything else. But that's where rubber meets the road. When your friends, when our fellow tech workers can't find work, look, a lot of them are saying, I'll be a consultant, I'll be a contractor, I'll, 1099. And a lot of those people may wind up becoming entrepreneurs who start a business. But it's almost like the forest fire that you need to burn out before the new growth comes up. And I don't think the fire is quite finished yet.
Still fuel out there to burn, right?
We'll see how this all plays out, but I would remind everybody the general economy is doing pretty well, and there's a lot of folks out there still hiring DevOps and IT professionals. So.
Absolutely.
And security and cyber.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, all right, let's move on from that. But before we do, I wanted to let's take a quick 30-second break here so we can gather our notes for the next segment and check out this great little announcement here from us at TechStrong. We'll be back in a minute, or 30 seconds.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the TechStrong Gang. We are now talking about AI. How is it impacting the workplace, and what do IT workers think about this new impact? You know, it's interesting. Pew Research just did a survey amongst IT workers and found that good amount of them, 32%, felt that this is going to help their productivity and innovation, and they'll do better with it. But there is still that apprehension about, will this replace us, or are we going to have a situation where our own jobs are threatened by it? But it really depends on the person. Another thing that's been coming up with AI is the amount of predictive analytics that they're able to get and get more insight into things. So that seems to be something positive that Watson from IBM, for example, is talking about, that they're able to analyze data at such a large scale. And that's how they're saying that this is beyond human capability, and they are very positive towards it. But I'm wondering what everybody and the gang thinks about this topic.
I think everybody's job is going to change, but I don't think the jobs go away. I think a lot of the stuff that you hate about your job, AI will help to either eliminate or reduce the amount of time required to do it, and I think that part is good. But there's some natural apprehension, because as roles change, organizations are going to be structured differently. And so who is in charge of what will all be in flux for at least another year, perhaps a year and a half. So that's where I think the anxiety comes from. What do you think?
You know, I saw this anxiety when I first started DevOps.com. We'll ask John Willis about this when he comes on in the next segment. You know, everyone said, the continuous testing and automated testing is going to make testing obsolete. And, you know, DevOps is going to cost people jobs, because as we go to cross-functional teams and become more efficient and automate more, we'll need less people. Before it was DevOps, it was Agile. Before it was Agile, it was something else. This is a common theme I've seen in 30 years in IT. And you know what? I've never seen the IT job number go down. So, this is all just noise. My 2 cents.
No, you can go back to cloud, and that's going to replace
cloud too.
Rack and stack server job, and robots and manufacturing and all that kind of thing. You know, I think the other way to look at it is, I mean, all of us have seen these waves. It seems like there's an initial group of people who see it as an opportunity, right? Okay, this is going to change things. Well, I want to figure it out. Let me get on board. And you know, John Willis is a great example of someone who early on, you know, saw this and started investing in his own knowledge and skills about AI. But I think in the end, kind of to Mike's point, it's more of a rising tide. It's going to lift all boats if you decide to participate. If you hold back and fight it, and just
if you're going to dig your
job
heels
going
in.
away, you know, that's probably what will happen, at least to you. But I think it's going to change our jobs, to Mike's point, but I think it's going to make us all more productive and give us new opportunities as well.
Yeah, I would say the new opportunities is interesting, because now you're seeing IT workers saying, well, need someone to write prompts for ChatGPT. That's a new skill set that they can bring to the table. Yeah.
But you know, I'm going to tell you something. This reminds me of an argument I had. My son was accepted to the Kelley School at Indiana University 5-6 years ago. I went with him out there to the open house, and a professor got up there and said that the minimum wage laws are artificial and hinder jobs because people won't hire someone at the higher wage. They'll just automate instead or use, automation in place of people. And I think, and he was trying to hold himself out as a capitalist because there's America, God darn it, in Bloomington. And the fact of the matter is, a real American says, if there's an automation that lets me cut ahead, I'll cut ahead. That's what capitalism, and that's what the market's about. So if AI is if your job is so darn easy to do that AI can come and do it, find another job. We're not here babysitting. Because then we'll talk about layoffs next year, right? Because we just have people who are doing jobs that really shouldn't be there. Right? I want good paying jobs. I want jobs that count. I don't want, this isn't the Tennessee Valley Authority in the Depression with Franklin Roosevelt where I'm giving people shovels and picks. Right? If that's the fact of it, I'm a capitalist, God darn it.
I believe it was
Good speech,
FDR
Gordon.
who said that if you cannot afford to hire people at a decent wage, you should just go out of business in the first place.
Yeah, so that's where we are. That's my take on the whole AI thing.
As part of that conversation, though, I think that what will change is those entry-level jobs that people have been counting on to get into IT for all these years, they might not be entry-level anymore. They may be at a higher level. So the bar for kids coming out of school to get into IT is going to be a lot higher. And I wonder how long it's going to take the colleges to figure that out, because it always seems to me...
I don't think they have figured it out from the last thing. I mean, Mitchell knows this in security. What's the biggest thing we hear from these kids who are graduating with cybersecurity areas of concentration and majors? You know what we hear?
Experience.
How do I break in?
Right.
Every job wants 3 to 5 years of experience.
Yeah.
It again, not a new problem.
Right.
My
Another
favorite
factor
job...
we don't necessarily talk about is we now are of an age of students who are growing up with AI as part of their part of the tool set they use in their own learning.
AI
Whether
natives.
the colleges have caught up to it or not,
Right.
they're using it, right? And they're figuring it out. So kind of like kids growing up with cell phones, we now have college students and earlier who are growing up with AI as a tool that they use. And they're going to figure out how to leverage it and help themselves get a job, be more productive, maybe do new things, start a company, whatever.
Right, and bring those skills to companies. Well, we already know how to do it. We've been using it, and maybe they're going to show their employers something that they didn't know.
Yeah.
It's the only people less out of touch than college are the HR directors. So I'm looking forward to that next ad that's going to come up that says, want it, somebody with 10 years of generative
There's
AI experience.
Well, we'll ask John Willis about that. He's doing some research on that now. But it's funny. My son, who's in law school now, who did not go to Kelley School because of that argument I had with the professor, he actually is in the tech lab at Suffolk University Law School, and they're working on AI interfaces both for lawyers and for people who need legal advice. So there are schools that are already incorporating this into skilling their kids, they're skilling their students to be ready when they come out with it.
Our last 2 interns in the engineering group at TechStrong are doing AI projects or on teams and labs in their curriculum. So
I think schools are getting ahead of this a little bit.
Anybody doing any math on what that will do for billable hours for lawyers?
Look, first thing I learned in law school is never do anything that's not billable. And don't work for free.
Still using
they'll figure
Wang
that
word
out.
processors.
Yeah,
Right?
and check cases that AI cites, make sure they're real.
Yeah, they always figure out a way to make money out of it. Don't worry, take no collection up for the lawyers. I don't want to go all Shakespeare on us, but all right. More on that, Bonnie?
As far as the AI goes, I think we're good on that topic. We're going to move on to some other topics.
All right, well, we'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
All right.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, guys, we're back, and we're going to be talking now with John Willis about some articles that he's written that are related to AI and all the things that are going on. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here.
Hey, John.
John, thank you for being our first TechStrong Gang member on TechStrong Gang. We're working some kinks out. Appreciate you coming on and working with us on this. For those who don't know John Willis, why don't we start there a little bit? John, do you want to introduce yourself, or you want me to embarrass you?
Why don't you embarrass me?
All right. So John Willis has written, is it 7 books now, John? 6 or 7?
Well, depending on what books you count, it's 12. But
12 books, or co-authored or co-authored up 12 books.
Yeah.
But more than that, John brings literally a lifetime of experience in the IT world, starting back in the 80s, if not the late 70s even, and was one of the early kind of cloud ambassadors, let's call them, who were, evangelizing moving to the cloud when it wasn't as readily accepted as it is now, let's say. But, I started doing that and then saw the DevOps thing happening. He was like the first U.S. citizen who was at the first DevOps days over in Ghent, Belgium. And then him and our friend Damon Edwards actually did the first DevOps days here in the U.S. And kind of, DevOps took off from there. John, was very involved with Gene Kim in Phoenix Project and the co-authored DevOps Handbook. Him and Gene also did Beyond the Phoenix Project. John's spoken at probably most of the DevOps days at one time or another, around the world in terms of cities. His most recent book is on Deming, The Life of Edward Deming, who many call the patron saint of DevOps. Also Lean, obviously. And John's working on his next book, which I'm not sure he wants to talk about quite yet. But I will tell you, his area of concentration has really been AI over the last 6 to 9 months, as it's really ignited his juices and passion, as all new tech things often do with John. So John, did I mess any of that up?
I think you got it just about right there, buddy.
All righty. So welcome. Mike, why don't you take it from here?
So John wrote an article for us on Digital CXO, and it's titled "Unstructured Data is the New Bacon." And the basic idea of the article, if I can do it justice in a quick summarization, is that unstructured data is what's driving all the training of the AI models, and there's a thing called the vector database that is at the crux of that, and it's become the linchpin of AI, and I'll let John kind of dive into what we need to know about vector databases, but they've been around for a while, John. It just seems like we're figuring out something interesting to do with them. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, so just to drop a little bit more on my book, it's really, my Deming book is, I like to say, is like a Michael Lewis version of what you'd learn about Dr. Deming, although I'm not as good a writer as Michael Lewis. So this is, the current book is really going to be that same style of, if you think of Michael Lewis was going to write a Moneyball version of the history of generative AI. So the thing about your question is, the idea of a vector goes back to the 1940s when the first neural network was created. And I won't get it now. I won't walk you through in the next 6 minutes we have left. But the point is, the math behind that was, basically 60 years ago, right? And there's been all sorts of incarnations of it throughout the years. I think the big thing is, like, a lot of the large models that we've seen, like GPT-3, 3.5, and then 4, right? And then the general public sort of is ChatGPT mostly, right? That is data that is in a neural network, basically, inside these massive models. And so you're right. I hadn't thought about it that way. Like, those models were created from like just ridiculous amount of unstructured data, the internet, basically, Redis, all these things that were out there. But what the article I was trying to drive is that it was an IDC report last year that it said 90% of the data in an organization is unstructured. So you think about ChatGPT 3.5, right? It is all this corpus of data of like everything we know except about your company, right? Because it's that data's not out there. So the reason why vector databases have gotten so popular is it allows you the ability, really sort of as a, like, I think they call it like a citizen data scientist is a referred term to people who don't know how to do training models and all this very complex stuff. You can literally just sort of load your data into these vectorized, they call them embeddings as well. And now you have this advantage of your data looking like it's in ChatGPT in a very simplistic description, right? And that's why it's become so popular. I mean, you know, and you can list the sort of reasons, like one, there's a deferred charge of like hitting OpenAI or whatever your preferred foundational model vendor is. But the bigger thing is it's an isolation of your corpus of data. So now I can put like my standards and procedures, I can put my governance data, or still questionable, like what's the leakage from a security perspective on how much you want to put in there, depending if it's host-based or not. But yeah, and the real point of that article was that we only manage about 10% of the data that we have in a corporation. That means that 90%, in fact, that same report said it's only used 50, that data, that 90% unstructured data is only used 58% of the time more than once, right? And then, so, you know, sort of Shannon Leeds, another sort of friend of our community, you know, DevSecOps, DevOps, and now AI, you know, she said, made this beautiful observation. She says that data is the voice of the organization, right? It is that, you know, it is Bob's directory, it's Sue's spreadsheet, it's Jane's emails, it's and the thing is, think about it, we spend 90% of our work on the 10% data, and we don't really manage that other 90% that there's so much value. And that's why vector databases, the whole concept of RAGs, right? The retrieval augmentation, there are other forms of vector databases being the most popular. So that's what I was trying to point out. And just for any old cloud era people listening who are just kicking the table and screaming out, I agree. I totally admit that I stole it from a t-shirt you used to make, which was "Data is the new bacon." So
Fair
John,
enough.
Hey,
John,
Mitch.
a question for you. Yeah, I'm just curious about, you know, it's easy to think of generative AI as kind of a search engine, right? Dump your stuff in there and then you query it, right? It's obviously much more sophisticated. Talk a little bit more about how vector databases make it more accessible to non-AI computer scientists, to the general practitioner, maybe data engineer in an organization,
yeah.
that give you that kind of data layer between that and the full large language model.
I'm glad you asked that, Mitch. So one of the proudest moments I had in my Deming book, which is I was able to explain Schrodinger's cat, and my mother-in-law understood it. So my sort of bar here now is there's a famous, you know, one of the first real neural networks. It was called the MNIST database. It was about 70,000 handwritten numbers, 0 through 9, and it was used by this Jan LeCun, who basically, they were literally doing a contract at Bell Labs for like NCR to read check numbers on the check and then ultimately zip codes. And so he basically, and it's the 101 of learning AI right now. You go out and you find the MNIST database to 70,000 and you learn how to build your own neural network. So like, I'm not there completely yet, but like I want to be able to explain that so that, again, my mother-in-law will be like, wow, I get how this neural network thing works. And it's simply, it's basically vectorized data. So like you have these highly dimensional vectors. You think about two-dimensional or three-dimensional, right? What you wind up doing, like in the sort of the OpenAI, most of the OpenAI models, it's 1,536 dimensions. And so what happens then is you take your data, especially in a vector database. So if you're going to sort of use your vector database in concert with, say, GPT-4, you would then you use this technique to sort of chunk it up, put the words in there's some real cool math about context of words and sentences, but ultimately it's words which get what they call tokenized. And not to get too deep, those turn into floating point numbers, represent where it lives in a 1,536. You know, so think of a three-dimensional, if we just use floating pointers for three-dimensional, it'd be 3 numbers, right? It's 1,536 for some context-related stuff. And so what happens then is when you do your searches or you do your commands, And depending on how you're doing it, if you're using something like an orchestrator, like a lane chain, it'll do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. But if you're just running these plain, you might say cat. And what it does is takes that word and it literally does a similarity search. And it's going to, again, I like someday I'll get this if it sounds too confusing. There's like a number of different similarities. One of them is what's called cosine similarity. And it's just the cosine, the angle in this massively dimensional of to tell you how far your word is from the word that you asked that's in the sort of the vectorized data in cat. And the similarity would be some percentage of how close that is. So when you start typing in who is Abraham Lincoln, or if you're working with your own vectorized data, like what is SOP 101, what are the rules of our SAP for installing routers? It will basically, do that sort of similarity search against these math floating points and just come back with the ones that are closest.
John, I have a question for you. Do you think through these searches that you're finding that people are tapping into data that they didn't even know they had? Like, let's say a client or customer social media tweet or something like that, and they didn't know that it was there, and now it's part of their mass database that they're looking into.
That's now I know why Alan has you on the show. That's a fantastic question. I was thinking about the other way, right? Because I'm doing a lot of work on how you take people's data and how do you get a higher similarity. I call it efficacy. The data science would probably get mad if I use that word, but so like I'll put data in and I'll sort of run some similarities and say, am I getting the right data? But there are really good examples of. There are some data. I think the more that is the bacon, right? Mm-hmm. Is the more you can get that unstructured data in there. I mean, at a surface level, you don't know what all the data is, right? So like if I can just start tapping into this 90% unstructured data and putting in a format so I can ask questions about it right off the bat, I'm learning things I don't know. Like I'm turning, not only data or data or information, I'm turning it into knowledge and understanding. Right. But I'm trying to think, there are some examples I've seen and they're not coming to my head where like I've been surprised. It's not quite the undiscovered knowledge, but like I went to build a study guide on my Deming book. And it was amazing the insight it had, I had read that book through 8 revisions. I probably read it cover to cover 30 times, and as I was going through it, I was like, this is more advanced or equal to my knowledge of this book. And it did it only one time.
Wow.
It was able to tap into, it wasn't 100% accurate. I had to clean some stuff up, but it was just amazing that I did it by chapter and chapter. And I sat back for a second. I had sort of an out of body experience where I was like, if this was a person, I would be shocked. I would think they would have read this book at least 20 times to be able to, but yeah, you're right. It is finding the understanding and, I think in the sort of tree of cognition, wisdom from just getting your data in there, because the power of these engines is just, the math behind it is just so incredible.
John, I've got two points I'd like to discuss with you and the rest of the gang. Number one, as you mentioned, vector databases are not new. They've been around 40 years or more. But what was kind of surprising, and I learned this at the hackathon, which we're going to talk about, that we did down here with John and a bunch of people, I guess in August, is that a lot of the vector database providers, vendors, were a little slow to realize that they were sitting on here, right? They didn't really have that keyed in, right? So, like for instance, there are some, and the database players better than me, John. There were some guys who recognized it right away, and they quickly gained a big following in the AI crowd, right? And then
the Pineapples of the world, right?
Yeah,
sort of purpose built for AI.
Pinecone, yeah, and then then you had something like Mongo, for instance, right? Mongo has a good vector database, but they were probably, John, you kind of opened their eyes a little bit for them, into what they
Well,
were sitting on there.
I think, so I mean, you're right. There was some like there, it'd be fun to go back to the history. Like it's like all things, Chat GPT blew the doors open on everything, right? There was sort of an AI, one of the things I'm covering in my book, there were like 2 AI winters, right? And there was an AI winter before leading up to, sort of the things that were happening starting about 2014, right? Yeah, everybody had these sort of embedding tools and these sentence transformers and all these ways to do sort of similarity against sort of homegrown data. But it was when sort of OpenAI, sort of introduced 3.5 and then ChatGPT, the world just like, and then that opened up a bunch of questions. It was kind of like, I like to use this, like just a little segue is that like there were lots of people using containers. Google was using it at core, all the passes were using containers, but nobody was using containers other than them. And then Docker came out and commoditized it. And now, like, containers are a way of life now, right? So I think that's the same thing with, like if you look at what OpenAI did, they literally bust the door open. So yeah, so the thing about MongoDB, which is really interesting, is I started playing around with like the pine cones and a couple of the early adapters. Chroma's DB is like your first 101. It's an embedded. You don't have to install anything. I mean, you got to install the sort of libraries, but you don't have to. It's not SaaS based, or it wasn't SaaS based. And then you sort of upgrade to Pinecone. And then the thing I found was, and this is the thing I in all transparency, I'm doing consulting for MongoDB right now. But I actually believe, and the reason I went to them, they didn't come to me because I knew Peter Ulander, who was the CMO over there, and I was like, you guys have an opportunity that I don't know that people are seeing, and it is that, and it's the thing I started telling everybody. It's less about AI and more about the data. This is all about a data play. There's it's like, remember the magazine called Computer World? Mm-hmm. Yeah, like where's that magazine? Like, what's a computer? Like, it's a fabric thing. I think AI is just going to be a fabric thing, and it's still going to go back to the data. So it's the people who manage and deal with the data, and this is their opportunity. They do data. I mean, who's the only company that does? Well, I mean, again, there's some of the big data candidates, but like Oracle, and then MongoDB has been in the enterprise for unstructured data for 10 years at scale. Mm-hmm. And so I think this, and what you find, the reason I like MongoDB, not to turn this into a MongoDB commercial, but is they treat all the data as sort of one database. So you create like it's a document object, which everybody's familiar with, every technical person. In fact, almost every data set on Hugging Face is JSON-based. Probably all, but I would say almost all. And it is that it's a document object, and then one of the fields in that object is an embedding, which is a vector. So now you have this incredible flexibility. So anyway, that's a short.
You know what? Let me move into another area because we're running on time here.
No worries.
So right now, it's still somewhat novel to hear companies creating their own LLMs, right? And then they feed that on top. You feed it into a chatbot or an AI engine that is also plugged into a larger AI other than just your own unstructured data. And people sort of ooh and ah. But we're quickly moving past the ooh and ah stage of that as that becomes sort of that's table stakes. It's anteing up, right? You have your own LLM running on top of a larger body of knowledge or data. I mentioned this hackathon we did back here in August, and we had some amazing people. Shannon Leitz, you mentioned, Tracy Bannon, of course, Patrick Dubois was here, and Damon Edwards, and Alex Honor, and a bunch of others. Stephen McGill, who I'm going to interview next week, from Sonatype. But John, that's when I first learned about custom LLMs out of vector database on top of regular, and this whole, in my simple-minded way of looking at it, you have long-term memory, short-term memory, what do you access first, and all of that. But yet when I speak to people, especially non-technical folks, this is sort of revolutionary to them. And I don't know those hackathons seem pretty productive to me.
Yeah, no, I think it was a great starting point because, I mean, if you think about the concept of dev and ops, you can look at generative AI as a DevOps problem. Right? And the one problem is, which I haven't focused too much on, but like the dev side is, like how do we get sort of citizen data scientists to train models? I think that's the next leap, right? Vector databases allow you to do a lot of stuff without having to know how to run things like PyTorch, or very complicated, I think very complicated from my background and my peers' background. So like, I think, and then making it really easy to get the data in a way that's sort of already formed and has high similarity, right? That's the future of development here. On the ops side, what we focused on at that hackathon, which was this, what I call this technical debt tsunami that is coming down the super freeway, because all this stuff's going to wind up in the enterprise. Every time you list a new vendor that says, "Oh, we got a Copilot at ours," the question that is going to come up is like, and right now, the ops and infrastructure people don't know how to ask the right questions. Hey, what's the stack? Like, if you're going to put like this vendor's new Copilot in my shop, can you at least tell me what the stack is? Well, what do you mean? Well, I know you didn't write the embeddings. I know you didn't write the orchestrator. I don't know you didn't write the model. I didn't know you didn't write that like millions and millions of lines of Python code that you're using. So again, can I ask you what the stack is? And so just having that conversation of people understanding. So getting all those people together in that room, step one was try to educate. We had Joseph Enox, right? He gave this amazing presentation. We all learned like our jaws drop. And so I think the biggest thing we have to do as an ops community and the DevOps is like educate our community to talk intelligently, so now they can understand when the CIO says, "Are you okay with us bringing in this product?" And
Absolutely.
like, well, I got a couple of questions. And the questions they couldn't ask a month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago.
Well, they didn't know the questions to ask.
That's right.
Hey,
That's right.
We need to wrap stuff up, but quickly I want to mention the hackathon. We did do a condensed video version of it. I forget how long it is, 40, 45 minutes. It's available on TechStrong TV. And we are announcing, if it hasn't already been announced, we're doing, actually Mark Hinkle was at the hackathon too. Mark is teaming up with us and we're doing a tremendous kind of all-day AI virtual session with a crazy lineup of speakers.
I'm running the DevOps track for him. Yeah,
yep,
so
John's running DevOps.
We got
That's
Shannon,
in late May.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can go to techstrongevents.com. You should, if it's not up now, it'll be up in the next couple of days to start registering for that. And of course, at RSA this year, we're going to be doing DevSecOps and AI. So stay tuned for that. It's Monday, May 6th. Mike.
Just for reference, the video is on TechStrong.ai.
Oh, it's on TechStrong.ai. You're right.
Right, because we showed it on TechStrong TV, but for that one-time thing, but it's permanently housed on TechStrong.ai, I think as of today. And so, in case you're looking for it, go check it out there.
Thank you for the correction.
It will be now, if it isn't.
Hey, John, man, thanks for coming on and enlightening us and entertaining us and just for your patience and support as always.
No worries. All right.
Thank you, John.
All right. I think that's going to wrap up TechStrong Gang for today. Stay tuned. I'm going to be back in a moment and I'll give you a preview of all the great other content we have on TechStrong TV today. But for TechStrong Gang for today, this is Alan Schimmel on behalf of Mitchell Ashley, Mike Brizard, and of course Bonnie Schneider, and special guest star John Willis, TechStrong Gang member. Have a great day, everyone.